There are parts of my past I've never spoken about, not because I forgot them, but because they never forgot me. Tonight, I'm breaking that silence, not for attention, not for sympathy, but because some memories don't stay buried unless they're finally named. If you're here, you chose to listen, so dim the lights. Listen carefully and understand this is not a story I usually tell. Some memories don't fade, they don't blur at the edges, they don't soften with time or shape themselves into stories you can share around a table. Some memories wait. They stay still, like something crouched in a dark corner. And then one day, usually late at night when the world finally quiets down enough for you to hear your own blood, they remind you they're still there, still watching. This is one of those. I've told parts of it before. Half jokes at parties, hints wrapped in nervous laughter. I've said things like, that house was weird, or my room had a mind of its own, and then changed the subject before anyone could ask more. Because back then, even I didn't know what I was really talking about. Now I do. I understand just enough. It happened when I was 10. That's old enough to remember details. Old enough to tell the difference between dreams and the things you don't have words for yet. But still young enough that when I told the truth, nobody really listened. Not the way I needed them to. We had just moved, me, my mom and my dad. A fresh start, they called it. New town, new school, new everything. I remember the drive out there, the way the trees got taller and the streetlights got farther apart. I had this feeling like we were driving to the edge of something, like the map would curl up if we went any farther. And then we pulled into the driveway. That house, I can still see it. Long and narrow, almost like a shoebox turned sideways. 2 stories. Painted this color that never seemed to settle, sometimes beige, sometimes gray, and sometimes colder, like a bruise. It didn't feel abandoned, but it didn't feel lived in either. It felt paused, like something was holding its breath. I remember stepping out of the car and hearing the wind shift behind the house, this low, rustling sound that didn't quite match the trees, like something brushing against the side of the house. My mom said, "Isn't it quiet out here?" and smiled like that was a good thing. But I remember thinking, it's too quiet. Inside, the house smelled like paint and dust, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes. My dad walked through each room like he was checking off a list in his head. My mom opened the curtains. The whole place looked bigger when it was empty, like it was pretending to be more than it really was. And then there was the hallway. That was the first thing I noticed. And I mean really noticed. It was long. Too long for the size of the house. You'd stand in the living room and look down it, and even if all the bedroom doors were open, it still looked dim, like the light refused to travel all the way to the end. That's where my room was, last door on the left. I remember walking toward it that first afternoon while my parents were still unpacking. The floor under the carpet made this soft, muffled groan, like stepping on a breath. Each footstep sounded quieter the farther I went down the hall, like the walls were pulling sound inward. And when I opened the door, there it was, my first real room. Not a shared space, not a bunk bed, mine. It was small, rectangular, beige walls, one narrow window that faced a crooked wooden fence in the backyard. The carpet was thin. There was a vent near the ceiling that clicked sometimes like it had a metal throat. And near the bed, the floor creaked, only in that one spot. It should have been ordinary, forgettable even. But I remember standing in it, alone for the first time, and hearing something beneath the silence. Not a noise, a rhythm, like breathing. Not loud, not obvious, just there, the room breathed. Or maybe it was the house. Either way, I remember standing still, holding my breath, trying to make sure I wasn't imagining it. I stayed quiet for a long time, And then my mom called from the kitchen, asking if I wanted to help unpack. I didn't say anything about what I'd felt. I didn't even mention the breathing. Not because I didn't believe it. I just didn't know how to say it. How do you explain to someone that a room has lungs? I didn't sleep much that first night. Not because of anything scary exactly. There were no shadows moving across the ceiling, no whispers under the bed, nothing obvious. Just a feeling like I was being listened to. I left the door open. I didn't tell myself why. Just did. Lying there in bed, I remember staring at the hallway, the way it stretched into darkness like a throat. The house was so quiet, but not in the peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet where every small sound stood out like it didn't belong. My blanket rustled too loud. My own breathing felt intrusive. The vent clicked once, sharply, and I flinched. I told myself I was just adjusting. New places always feel weird at first. That's what my mom said when I mentioned the hallway the next morning. Said it felt too long. Oh honey, it's just the way it's shaped. You'll get used to it. She handed me a box of clothes to carry upstairs and smiled without looking. Give it a few days. So I did. I tried. I unpacked my books and lined them up by size on the little white bookshelf my dad built. Put up a poster from my old room. Tried to make it feel familiar even if the walls felt blank in a way that went deeper than paint, like they'd been waiting a long time for someone to fill them. The days blurred into routine. Wake up, cereal, new school, quiet dinners. At night, I'd lie in bed with my eyes half open, watching the shadows shift. Sometimes they moved like headlights from the street, but sometimes they didn't move at all. They stayed still, but I still felt them. There's a difference between seeing a shadow and knowing it sees you back. I remember one afternoon, maybe 5 days after we moved in, I was sitting cross-legged on my bed, drawing with my back against the wall. Sunlight was slanting through the window at just the right angle, lighting up a line across the far wall. That's when I saw them. Thin vertical marks, not scratches, not like claw marks or anything dramatic, just impressions, shallow, subtle, almost invisible unless the light hit them just right. They ran from the floor up to above where I could reach. Dozens of them, all the same length, all the same spacing. I remember squinting, leaning in, trying to make sense of them. I ran my fingers down one. It didn't feel like damage. It felt pressed in, like someone had pushed into the wall while the paint was still soft, or like fingers, 5 at a time. I stared at the wall for a long time. My pencil slipped from my hand and rolled onto the floor. I didn't pick it up. That night, I mentioned the marks to my dad. He came in with a flashlight, made a show of looking. It's just old house stuff, he said, brushing his palm against the wall. Settling. Maybe someone had furniture pressed up against it. But they're even. He didn't stop rubbing the wall. Paint does weird things sometimes, especially if they didn't primer right. We can repaint if it bugs you. That was my dad. Something broken? Fix it. Something weird? Call it quirky. Paint over it. He painted that wall the next weekend. I didn't watch. But the marks came back, not as strong, just faint outlines, like they'd never really left. After that, I stopped telling them when things felt off. I started watching more quietly, paying attention. The first thing I noticed was my chair. I had this desk chair, black vinyl, squeaky wheels, nothing fancy. I always kept it pushed in at the desk, facing the wall. But every few mornings when I woke up, it would be turned, not far, just slightly angled toward the bed. Then a book from the shelf turned up on the floor. Then the closet door was open one morning, even though I knew I had shut it. None of it was big enough to prove anything. It was the kind of stuff you could explain away without even trying. But I knew. I started whispering things before bed, like tests. I'd place a toy in a certain spot, Stack 3 books instead of 2. Make a note of exactly how open the closet door was. Each morning, something would be just a little different. Once, I found my pillow on the wrong side of the bed. I stood in the doorway for almost a full minute before I could walk over and touch it. The room wasn't just changing, it was responding. And I started to wonder if maybe it was always like this. Maybe the room didn't start changing. Maybe it started noticing me. The first time I woke up like that, I didn't scream. I didn't sit bolt upright or kick my blankets off. I didn't even open my eyes right away. I just knew. There's a very specific feeling that comes with waking suddenly in the middle of the night. Not from a sound or a dream, but from certainty. Your body does it before your thoughts catch up. Your breathing changes, your muscles lock, your heart starts racing like it's already late. I remember lying there, flat on my back, staring at the faint outline of my ceiling fan. The room was dark, but not unfamiliar. Everything was exactly where it should have been. And yet, something was different. The air felt thicker, not humid, not hot, just heavier. Like the space between objects had weight now. Every breath I took felt louder than it should have been, like I was making noise in a place that demanded silence. I kept my eyes open. I was afraid that if I closed them, I'd miss something important. Or worse, I'd acknowledge it. There was no shape, no shadow moving across the walls, nothing under the bed. But I felt it, not watching me, knowing me. The sensation wasn't sharp or violent, it was slow, curious, like the moment someone recognizes your face in a crowd but hasn't decided whether to call your name yet. I wanted to move. I couldn't. My arms felt too heavy, my legs might as well have been part of the mattress. I remember thinking, if I move, it'll know I know. That thought terrified me more than anything else. I don't know how long I lay there. It could have been seconds. It could have been an hour. Time doesn't behave normally when you're that scared. It stretches and thins and stops making sense. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under. I didn't dream. The next morning, sunlight filled the room like nothing had happened. I told myself it was sleep paralysis. I'd heard about it in school. The teacher said it was normal, the brain waking up before the body, fear filling in the blanks. That explanation worked for a day, then it happened again. And again, each time the same thing, waking suddenly, heart racing, the feeling of recognition hanging in the air, like the room was holding on to something just out of sight, waiting for the right moment. I started sleeping with the lamp on, a small one by my bed, warm yellow light. It made the corners softer, made the shadows behave. For a while it helped, but light doesn't erase fear. It teaches it where to hide. The feeling didn't go away, it just changed. Instead of pressing in from the darkness, it lingered at the edges, behind the door, inside the walls. Sometimes it felt like it was right up against my skin, as close as breath. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one morning, staring into my cereal while my mom packed lunches. "I don't like my room," I said. She paused, just for a second. "Why not?" "It feels weird at night." She smiled gently, the kind of smile adults use when they're already deciding what something means. "New places can do that. Your brain's just adjusting. It feels like it's listening." That made her laugh, soft, affectionate. "Rooms can't listen, Jamie." She reached out and brushed my hair back. "You're safe. We're right down the hall." Right down the hall. That hallway. At night, it felt longer. The distance between my door and theirs stretched, like the house was gently pulling us apart. I stopped bringing it up after that. Instead, I started paying attention to smaller things. How the creak in the floor near my bed happened more often, even when I wasn't stepping there. How the vent seemed to click only after I'd settled in, like it was responding to my stillness. How sometimes just before falling asleep, I'd feel a pressure near my ear, like someone had leaned in about to whisper, but it never did. That was almost worse. The room wasn't threatening me, it wasn't trying to scare me away, it was learning. Learning how I breathed, how long it took me to fall asleep, what scared me enough to keep my eyes open. And slowly, without realizing it at first, I stopped thinking of the room as something I occupied. I started thinking of it as something that contained me. The night it truly happened, the night I stopped being able to explain it away, I woke up already afraid. Not startled, not confused. Afraid. My eyes were open before my thoughts were. I was staring at the narrow strip of ceiling just above my lamp, the bulb still glowing softly, casting a dull yellow pool over the bed. Everything looked normal, painfully normal, and yet my heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The air was wrong. It felt close, like the room had leaned in while I was asleep and hadn't leaned back out again. I didn't move at first. I counted my breaths the way my mom once taught me. Slow in, slower out. 1, 2, 3. I waited for the panic to fade, for my body to catch up to logic. It didn't. The pressure in the room thickened, not physically but emotionally. The way a silence can grow heavy when someone is about to say something important. The way a room feels right before a surprise party. Except there was no joy in it, only expectation. Something was about to happen. The realization didn't come as a thought, it came as certainty. It knows I'm awake. My fingers curled into the sheets. I remember noticing the texture, the tiny pills in the fabric, the faint smell of laundry detergent. I focused on details because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. Afraid that if I let my mind wander, it would wander somewhere else. The lamp flickered, just once, not enough to go out, not enough to panic my parents down the hall, just enough to make my stomach drop. The feeling in the room shifted. It wasn't curiosity anymore, it was recognition. Have you ever locked eyes with a stranger and realized they know exactly who you are? That they've been watching you longer than you realized? That moment where the world narrows and everything inside you says, this matters. That's what it felt like. Except there was no one to look at. The room itself felt attentive, focused, as if the walls, the ceiling, the floor, all of it had aligned around a single point. Me. I wanted to call out. My parents were right there, just down the hall. But the idea of making noise felt wrong, like interrupting something delicate, something that might react badly if startled. My mouth opened, no sound came out, and then, clear as if someone had leaned right up to my ear, I felt it. Not a voice, a shape of a thought. Jamie, not spoken, not whispered, known. The moment that name settled into the room, everything changed. The pressure intensified, blooming outward from my chest. My skin prickled. Tears sprang to my eyes without warning, not from pain, but from the sheer wrongness of it. I hadn't told the room my name. I hadn't said it out loud in here. I knew with absolute certainty that something had learned it without my permission. That's when I finally moved. I yanked the blanket over my head, curling into myself like that could make me smaller, like that could hide me from something that didn't need eyes. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. I stayed like that for a long time. Long enough for the fear dull into exhaustion. Long enough for my thoughts to blur at the edges. Eventually, I slept. When I woke up in the morning, my throat hurt. My mom noticed right away. "Did you cry last night?" I shrugged. I didn't trust my voice. She pressed her lips together, worried now. "Bad dreams?" I nodded. That was easier than explaining that my room had said my name without speaking. That night, my dad walked me back to my room after brushing my teeth. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, surveying the space like he could see whatever I couldn't. "There's nothing here, buddy." he said gently. Just walls, just a room. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But as he turned off the light and closed the door most of the way, I felt it again. That subtle shift, that sense of attention returning, patient as ever. It had time. It knew my name now, and it wasn't done with me. The next few days passed in pieces. I'd find myself zoning out at school, staring at corners or the edges of windows. I jumped at small sounds. My teacher asked if I was sick. I said I wasn't sleeping well. She gave me a tired smile and said, "New house?" Like that explained everything. I guess to her it did. At home, my parents started paying more attention. Not in the way I wanted them to, but enough to notice the change. My mom would check on me more often, poke her head into my room just to ask how homework was going. My dad knocked now before entering, even if it was just to drop off a basket of clean laundry. They didn't say anything directly, but I could feel it, that quiet tension grown-ups get when they're trying to fix something invisible, like they were waiting for a name they could give it. Anxiety, adjustment, stress, anything but the truth. One night I told my mom I didn't want to sleep in my room anymore. She didn't get mad. She didn't laugh. She sat on the edge of my bed, still in her work clothes, her heels kicked off near the door. She took my hand in both of hers and looked at me in that soft, tilted head way she used when I was younger and sick. "What's scaring you?" she asked. I didn't know how to answer, because it wasn't a thing I could describe. It wasn't a monster in the closet or a figure at the window. It was a feeling, a presence, a knowing, something vast and silent that wrapped around me like a closed hand the moment the door shut. So I said what I could. "It feels like the room doesn't want me to leave." Her eyes flickered just for a second, like she didn't expect that. Then she smiled, soft, patient. "It's just a room, Jamie. You know that, right?" I nodded because I was supposed to. She squeezed my hand. "Your brain is still adjusting. That happens with big changes. Sometimes our bodies hold on to feelings longer than they need to." She meant well. They both did. A few nights later, my dad brought a small plug-in nightlight. He crouched next to the outlet and screwed the tiny bulb in, his knees popping as he stood up. "This should help," he said, flicking it on. It cast a gentle blue light, just enough to chase away shadows. He clapped me on the shoulder, the way he always did when he didn't know what else to say. "You're okay, kiddo. It's all in your head." That phrase, it stayed with me. All in your head. It made the fear feel like my fault. That night, I lay awake in bed, watching the little blue glow stretch across the floor. The room was still, not peaceful, not empty, just still. I started to think maybe they were right. Maybe the fear was something I'd built out of unfamiliar corners and late-night sounds. Maybe I could take it apart again, piece by piece. I was almost asleep when I heard the sound, just a small one, a tiny slow creak, right at the spot near the bed, the same board. I froze. I didn't turn my head. I didn't breathe. I just listened. Nothing followed. Just silence, but the kind that has shape, the kind that waits. The next morning, I checked the floor again. Nothing there. The next night, it creaked again, right after the light went off. The night lights stayed on. It always stayed on. But the room had learned something new. It didn't need the dark. It just needed time. It began waiting longer. It stopped doing anything while my parents were near. I noticed that when my mom sat on the bed, or when my dad opened the door, the pressure in the air lifted, like the room was holding its breath. But once they left, that's when it would return. Not in a rush, not angrily, patiently. I started hearing faint ticks from the closet door, a hinge that wasn't loose before, a soft click near the window, even when it wasn't open. It wasn't the sounds themselves that scared me. It was the timing, always after the light went off. always when I was alone. The room wasn't guessing anymore, it was studying me. And what scared me more than anything else was realizing that somehow I was starting to study it back. The sunlight hit the wall just right again. Late afternoon, slanting in through the narrow window like it was trying to reveal a secret. I was sitting on the floor, back against my bed, sketching in a notebook, just shapes, lines, little looping mazes. I didn't realize I was drawing until I looked back. I'd started filling the pages without thinking, the same shapes over and over again. That's when I noticed it again, the wall across from me, that faint shimmer in the paint, like something buried under a thin layer trying to push through. I stood up slowly, crossed the room. The closer I got, the clearer it became. Not just the lines, but their intent. These weren't cracks or stress marks. They were scratches, but not from an object. They were too controlled, too deliberate. Long vertical impressions starting near the floor and running higher than I could reach. Some shallow, some deeper. Some clustered together like someone had pressed their hand against the wall and dragged down, fingers spread. I reached out and touched one. The paint felt smooth, but my fingertip caught on something slight, like a groove too shallow to see but deep enough to feel. I ran my fingers down the line, breath held, and then I saw it. At first it looked like random carving, but the more I stared, the more the pattern resolved. Letters, slanted, crammed together, sometimes overlapping. Named, stepped and squinted, letting the sunlight stretch across the wall. The impressions revealed themselves in clusters, some vertical, some crooked, dozens of them, maybe more. Some were full names, some just firsts, a few repeated. And at the bottom, just above the baseboard, one stood out. My name, Jamie. Pressed in, not scratched, but imprinted like someone had pushed it into the wall with steady hands. I stared at it for a long time. My knees felt hollow. I had to sit. I didn't remember writing it. I knew I hadn't. I checked my fingertips. Nothing. No paint, no sign I'd ever touched the wall hard enough to leave a mark. But it was there. The same slanted hand as the others. The same shallow depth. The same quiet desperation. That's what hit me hardest. The feeling behind it. These weren't decorations. They were records. The room was keeping names. I pulled my sleeve over my hand and tried to rub mine away. Nothing happened. The groove stayed. I pushed harder, scrubbed. Nothing. That night, I didn't tell my parents. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew what they'd say. They'd think I'd carved it myself, or imagined it, or dreamed it. They'd tell me I was sleepwalking. That maybe I did it in my sleep. But I hadn't. I knew I hadn't, because the wall had dozens of names and some of them had been there a long time. The paint rippled around them like it had been repainted over and over, and the wall just kept rejecting it. There was one near the top, scratched deeper than the rest. It wasn't mine. It was a name I didn't recognize. But I had the sudden cold understanding that it had belonged to another kid. Another me. Another someone who had slept in this room and whispered fears into the dark. Another someone who had stayed too long. After I saw the names on the wall, I stopped sitting with my back to it. Even when I was reading or drawing or pretending to do homework, I kept myself facing the room, like it would make a difference. Like the room would somehow behave differently if I was watching. For a while, I tried to tell myself that maybe I had done it. The name, the drawings, the changes. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe this was a phase. Maybe I was looking too hard and turning everything into something it wasn't. I wanted that to be true. But the room didn't let me lie to myself for long. It started slow. A pencil on my desk rolled onto the floor in the night. A sock I'd left crumpled near the closet was suddenly folded, resting on the dresser. My pillow rotated slightly, not enough to notice right away, Just enough that I had to stop and think, was it always like that? That's what the room did best. It made me doubt, not just what I saw, but when I saw it. I began doing little experiments, tests, like I was trying to trap it. I placed my chair in a specific position before bed, with the legs aligned perfectly against the edge of the rug. I left a book open to the same page every night. I taped a small scrap of paper to the inside of my closet door, and each morning, something would be off. The chair would be turned, slightly, but always toward the bed. The book would be closed. The paper would be gone, not ripped off, not fallen, gone. I stopped sleeping deeply. Every creak, every tick of the vent sent adrenaline through my veins. I'd lie still, pretending to be asleep, trying to catch it in the act, but nothing ever moved while I was looking. The room had patience. It waited for my eyes to close. It waited for my breathing to slow. I began keeping track of everything on a page in my notebook. I drew little maps where everything was, how I left it. I made checklists, positions, angles. I wrote the time I went to sleep, the time I woke up. I recorded the exact direction my pillow was facing. But it didn't help. If anything, it made it worse. Because now the changes weren't just guesses. I had proof. And the more I tried to control it, the more precise the room became. One night, I placed my shoes side by side, toes aligned with the edge of the bed. In the morning, one was turned backward, deliberately, perfectly, facing me. I stared at it for a long time. My body wouldn't move. The sun was rising outside, orange, warm, soft, but none of that made it into the room. It was like the walls held light differently now, like the day had to ask permission to come in. That's when I realized the truth. The room wasn't just listening, it was responding to me, to my habits, to my attention. It wasn't trying to hurt me, not yet. It was trying to understand me, or maybe teach me something. That's what scared me most. Because if it was teaching, then what was I learning? The dreams started the way all dreams do, quietly, like slipping into warm water. I didn't notice the pattern at first, not until maybe the third or fourth time, but eventually it became clear. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't dreaming of my room, I was in it, perfectly replicated. The same window, the same scuffed baseboards, the same faint hum in the vent. Everything looked exactly right until I stood up. That's when it shifted. Not visually, not in a way that would jump out on a blueprint, but perceptually. The walls leaned inward just slightly. Not enough to trap me, just enough to listen. The corners of the room were too sharp, too deep. The air had weight, like it had been still for years and didn't know how to move anymore. The light was always dim, as if coming from somewhere outside time. And the door was always closed. That door. The one that in real life I kept open almost every night. But in the dream it was sealed shut. No light from the hallway, no crack at the bottom, just a door, solid and smooth, waiting. Every time I reached for the knob, I stopped short. Not out of fear, though fear was always there. It was a feeling deeper than that, a knowing, that opening it meant something permanent, something I couldn't undo. So I stayed inside the dream room, waiting, listening. Sometimes I'd press my ear against the wall and I could swear I heard breathing, not human, not mechanical. Something slow, massive, deep. Then one night I opened it. I don't remember deciding to. I didn't build up to it or think, this is the night. I just did. I reached out, hand trembling, fingers brushing cold metal. The doorknob turned easily, too easily, and the door swung open without resistance. What was on the other side wasn't the hallway, it was the same room, but not. This version of my room was older, not aged, abandoned. The walls were darker, the paint peeling in long curling strips like dead skin. The air smelled thick, sour, still. Like a room that had been sealed off for a decade and only now let open. There were no objects, no bed, no desk, just walls, covered in names. They were everywhere, carved deep, layered over each other. Some shallow, faded with time, others angry, etched so hard into the plaster they cracked it. First names, last names, initials. Some I couldn't read, written in strange, slanted loops. But one thing was clear, they were all real. None of them were decoration. None of them were mistakes. These were left behind, desperate attempts to be remembered, or maybe to resist being forgotten. I walked along the wall, dragging my fingers over grooves that felt like wounds. And then I saw it again. My name, Jamie, etched in frantic lines, repeating, overlapping, each one slightly different, as if written again and again by someone trying to get it right, or trying not to disappear. And right next to it, a gap in the wall, a hollow space, smooth and clean, waiting. I turned around to leave, but the door was gone. The room didn't spin, it didn't shudder, it just changed. Subtly, softly, like it had decided something. I began to panic. I ran my hands along the walls, searching for the seam, the exit, anything. Then, all at once, I woke up, sitting upright in bed. Drenched in sweat, the lamp was still on, my blankets were tangled on the floor and my closet door wide open. I stared at it for a long time. The air in the room was calm, still, but not empty, never empty. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The scream didn't feel like mine. It came from somewhere too deep, too old. I don't even remember opening my mouth. One moment I was in that other version of my room, the one with the cracked paint and layered names, and the next I was standing in the middle of my bed, screaming so loud it burned my throat. My body was shaking, arms drawn up like I was still trying to claw my way out of the dream. My parents burst in seconds later. My mom reached me first, hands on my shoulders, repeating my name over and over. Jamie, Jamie, you're awake. It's okay, sweetheart. You're here. You're here. But I wasn't. Not really. The room still felt around me, watching, listening, thinking. My dad paced the room, muttering under his breath, checking the closet, the window, the corners. There's nothing here, he said, as if angry at the suggestions that something might be. Jamie, buddy, did you have a nightmare? I nodded because it was easier. But I was still shaking. My mom pulled me into the hallway, wrapping a blanket around me. I could see her exchanging a look with my dad, tight-lipped, worried, like they were both realizing this wasn't just adjustment anymore. That night, I slept in their room. I didn't dream. The next morning, something changed in the house. They didn't say it out loud, but something about the way they moved told me they were taking me seriously now, or at least taking the symptoms seriously. My mom didn't go into work. My dad made phone calls. I stayed in the living room, curled on the couch, watching cartoons I didn't care about. That afternoon, they emptied my room. Everything came out. The desk, the chair, the mattress, even the curtain. My dad peeled back the carpet near the bed. My mom stood in the doorway, arms crossed, chewing her thumbnail. They painted the walls, a new color, pale blue this time. My mom let me pick it. Then came the priest. He was soft-spoken, older, with deep lines around his mouth that made him look permanently worried. He moved through the house slowly, muttering prayers under his breath, sprinkling holy water in each room. When he got to mine, he paused longer than the others. He didn't say anything about it, but I saw the way his eyes lingered on the far wall, the one that had held the names. He stood still for a long time, and when he finally left, he gave my mom a look I didn't understand. Not pity, not doubt, just acceptance. Like someone who knew some things couldn't be fixed, only acknowledged. That night, they moved my bed back in. Fresh sheets, new pillow, a brand new nightlight. This one green. The room smelled like paint and incense, and for a little while it worked. No dreams, no creaking, no whispers in the dark. I started to believe maybe we'd done it. That maybe all it took was new walls and someone with a robe and a vial of water to chase the thing out. But I should have known better. The room wasn't gone, it was just waiting, pretending, resting, because that's what it did. It learned, and it never ever forgot. It stayed quiet for weeks. No dreams, no creaking floorboards, no rearranged furniture. The room felt flat, not safe, but empty, like whatever had been there had packed itself away. I still kept the lamp on and the night light, and the door cracked just enough to see the hall. But I started sleeping again, really sleeping. I remember the first morning I woke up and felt rested, like the fear had finally drained out of my body. My mom noticed. She smiled while I poured cereal and said, "You look brighter today." I nodded. I didn't say I was still afraid to speak too loud in the room, or that sometimes I caught myself whispering my name under my breath, just to own it again. Just to remind myself it was mine. Still the silence held, and I started to believe it. Until the day I came home and found the notebook. I saw it the moment I stepped into the room. It was sitting on my desk. Black, no label, perfectly centered. I froze in the doorway. My mom hadn't mentioned cleaning my room. My dad never touched my things. And this wasn't something I'd left behind or forgotten. I knew, with that same awful certainty I'd felt the night the room first said my name, it hadn't been there before. My hands shook as I picked it up. The cover was smooth but stiff, like it had never been used, the spine uncreased. I opened to the first page. Drawings, rough pencil sketches, precise but strange. A hallway, too long, angled slightly downward. The edges of the walls were shaded heavily, giving it a sense of depth that made my stomach tighten. Next page, a door. My door. Closed. Next, my room, drawn exactly as it was, bed against the left wall, window across from the footboard, vent near the ceiling. Even the nightlight was there, a small green dot in the corner, but the walls were shaded darker, the angles were wrong. The bed looked smaller, and standing beside it, near the pillow, a figure, drawn with no face, no hands, just a shape, tall, slightly hunched, shoulders rounded like it was leaning forward, its head tilted, looking down at me. I flipped to the last page. This one was different. The room was drawn from a top-down view, like a blueprint. And the walls had markings all over them. Tiny scratches. I recognized the shapes, they were the names. The same names I'd seen in the dream. In the corner of the drawing, written over and over again in tiny looping script, Jamie, 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 Jamie. The pencil marks grew darker the more the name repeated, until the last one had been pressed so hard the paper had torn through. I slammed the notebook shut. My breathing was too fast. My mouth was dry. I turned toward the hallway to call for my mom, but I didn't say anything, because the room felt different again. Not louder, not darker, just decided, like it had finally stopped waiting. That night I didn't turn the lamp on. I wanted to. Every instinct screamed for it, but something had changed after the notebook, after those drawings, after the last page with my name pressed into it like a signature. I understood now. The room wasn't haunted. It wasn't cursed. It wasn't even trying to scare me, not really. It was remembering, recording. Each night I slept here, each fear I whispered into the dark, each moment I flinched or froze or held my breath. It had kept them, stored them, like memories, like keepsakes. It didn't want to hurt me, it wanted to keep me. The notebook was the room's way of saying, I know who you are, and the figure beside the bed, that wasn't a threat, that was acceptance. I lay in bed with the notebook still clutched in my lap, its cover warm now from my hands. My fingers dug into the edge like I could peel it open again and find a different ending. But I didn't need to look, I already knew what was coming. Around 3 a.m, the shift happened. It wasn't visual, it was emotional. The air thickened, the silence grew teeth. I felt the attention gather around me, pulling in from every corner, every vent, every shadow. The same pressure I'd felt that night when the room said my name, but stronger, heavier. This time it wasn't waiting for me to wake up. It was here for me. I sat up slowly, my breath caught. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I said the words instead, soft, measured. You don't get to keep me. The room didn't like that. The air surged inward, pressing against my chest like a hand. The vent let out a sharp metallic click. The closet door creaked, slow and deliberate. My skin prickled. The lamp didn't flicker. It flared, once. Bright enough to sting my eyes. And I knew that if I waited any longer, something would happen that I couldn't come back from. So I closed my eyes, and I pictured it. The dream door, closed, waiting, always at the center of everything. And I opened it. This time I didn't hesitate. I stepped through. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the hallway floor, not in bed, not in the dream, just the hallway. My cheek was pressed to the carpet. My legs were cold. I could feel the faint tremble of footsteps rushing toward me. And then hands. 2 sets, one lifting my head, one grabbing my shoulders. My parents. Their voices came in bursts, relieved, frightened, trying not to sound either. Jamie? Jamie, what happened? Were you sleepwalking? I heard something. Are you okay? I sat up slowly. The air was thin, bright. Behind them, my bedroom door stood wide open. The lamp inside was still on. The room was quiet, empty, ordinary. But I knew better now. It hadn't let me go. I had left. Or maybe I had escaped. That morning, without asking, my dad carried my mattress into the smaller room at the end of the hall, the one that was supposed to be for guests. It was barely big enough for the bed and a desk, but I didn't care. I never stepped foot in the other room again. We stayed in that house 3 more months. The for sale sign went up quietly. No one explained why. No one needed to. By then, even my parents had stopped pretending things were normal. And when we left, we didn't say goodbye to the house. We didn't talk about it on the drive out. We just moved on, or tried to. I didn't dream of the room again for years, not until last month. I was visiting my parents, now older, now softer. We were sorting through boxes in the attic. Photo albums, old school projects, newspaper clippings, all the usual evidence of a childhood that didn't feel entirely mine anymore. I found a picture. It was the house, taken from the street, our old car in the driveway, my bike near the fence. I turned it over. In my mother's neat, careful handwriting, Jamie's room used to be the nursery. I stared at it for a long time. Then I saw it, faint. Not in her hand, but there, beneath the ink, etched into the paper like it had been pressed a dozen times by a child learning to spell. A name, not mine, written again and again, looping, fading, returning, as if the house had signed it. Some places don't forget, they learn. And once they know your name, they never truly let you go.